I will fully admit that I don't know why. I also don't particularly know how. I just kind of know that it is. And after basically a lifetime as a Christian of asking how and why at 35, at 22 years of being a Christian, I've just sort of come to peace with it. That it just is what it is. And by it is what it is, I mean it's not what I want it to be. Like, I would love it. I would absolutely love it if it all fit together like a puzzle. That's what I want faith and just really everything in when it comes to the Bible and God and Jesus and Scripture and religion and everything else. I would love for it all to fit together like a puzzle. Like, you make a puzzle and like every piece has a fit, like every piece fits together, and then in the end it makes a picture, and anytime, you look back, it's always the same picture. That's how puzzles work. Like, unless you have one of those weird haunted puzzles where there's pieces that go missing, or then the picture changes. I don't know if you guys have that puzzle, but I never have. Also, I don't like puzzles, so I don't think I've put one together since I was 5. So this illustration is limited. But that's what I want. That's what I want faith to look like. I want it to all fit together. I want it to always, be something I can return to and look at, and it always gives me an answer. And there's never any questions. There's never any confusion. There's never anything like that. But it turns out that is not the way it ever is, and it's certainly not the way it is when it comes to this topic, and I don't know why, and I've been asking for years, and I don't know how, and I've been asking for years, so all I can tell you is that it is, and at this point you're probably wondering, well, what is it? And the easiest way for me to explain what it is to tell you a story. And that story is about a gentleman from the Old Testament by the name of Gideon. Now, Gideon lived during a time in the history of God's people in Israel when they weren't really a nation the way that we think of a nation. Like, we think about a country and a nation as having like a formal government, and it's very organized, and there's people that are kind of running things. But that's not what it was. Instead, at the time that Gideon was alive, Israel was sort of just like a loose collective of tribes. Just different people, and what they were united by was they were united by a shared history and a shared faith in a shared God. That's really all that this group of people was, is, hey, our families had gone through similar things. Hey, we believe in God in similar ways, and that's really what united them. Well, as happens so often in the Old Testament, sometimes that doesn't go well. I mean, sometimes it does go well, but other times it doesn't go so well because the people of Israel had this bad habit of sort of forgetting who it was that God was and who it was that they were and what it was they were supposed to be believing in and how they were supposed to be faithful. And it was easy to do, right? I mean, these people didn't read. They didn't have, a book you could just hand to somebody like we have. And, it was tough. And they looked around at other nations and other peoples, and they had, formal governments, and they had, formal religions with all these gods and deities and all of these things. And they very often said, well, we want to be like those people. And so it was in the days of the life of Gideon where the people of Israel sort of forgot who God was and forgot who they were, and they decided they wanted to be like everyone else. And they started worshiping their deities, and they started going through other customs and traditions, and they completely turned their backs on the God of their ancestors. So again, as often happens in the Old Testament, it's a very common story. It's a theme. As things happen, God was, sort of more than a gentleman. If you say, hey, God, I don't want you to be part of anything, God says, okay, well, I won't. And because of that, the people of Israel suffered. God decided no longer to protect them from some of the things that they were asking for. He sort of just let them have what they were asking for. And as a result, in this case, in the life of Gideon, there was a group of people, it gets confusing here, the Midianites, who decided that they were going to make easy pickings of the people of Israel. Again, it makes sense. People of Israel, they're not super organized. They don't have, the military, the army, the protection that other people have. They have their faith in God, and they've abandoned their faith in God, and so now they basically have nothing. And so the people of Midian decided, hey, we can just go take all the stuff they've got. They sent raiders and riders and big hordes of angry people on camelback, and they went in and they stole their crops, and they would wait until it was harvest time, and they would go and they would harvest their crops for them and then take them home, and they would go and they would take their livestock and their animals, and they would burn their homes down, and they would pillage everything, and they would murder, and they would rape, and they would do all of these things that are very bad things. And when push came to shove, at the end of the day, the people of Israel were suffering in a way that was absolutely cruel. The people of Israel decided we need to just hide, and so they actually tried to escape. They left where they were living, and they went into the mountains. They lived in caves. They went away from the places that they loved in their homes. They went to the places that nobody really liked. And it turns out that didn't help, because as it turns out, a camel can ride into a mountain the same way it can ride into a field. And so the Midianites, they went hunting. And so the people of Israel tried to hide, but the Midianites, they found them. And so the same cycle happened again and again, and year after year, for 7 years. For 7 years, the people of Israel suffered until around year 7, the people of Israel began to starve. Which is amazing. I mean, they're living in a land of milk and honey, remember? Like, it's easy to grow crops, it's easy to grow food, it's easy to have livestock, and yet the people are starving because every time they grow something, these other people show up and take it. And so the people are trying to figure out, what can we do? What should we do? And some of the people of Israel got this crazy idea that maybe they should pray to the God that brought them here in the first place. And so they prayed, and they asked God for help. And God said, okay, great, I always would have helped. You just needed to, not tell me to leave. And so God sends a prophet. And this prophet preaches to the people this powerful message that God had always been with them, that God was always there, that God was always just waiting, and that God had brought the people out of Egypt, conquered the Egyptians, and the Midianites were no Egyptians. Okay, these guys, I mean, they were mean and they were cruel, but they were not Egypt. Like they were a nuisance compared to the grandeur of Egypt, And he says, listen, I rescued your ancestors from Egypt. I was with them. I will be with you also. Just repent. And so God sent a prophet to the people, and the people started getting excited about maybe we have hope through God. And I say that when the people minus, at the very least, a man named Gideon. You see, Gideon was not excited. He was not impressed by this prophet. And we know that because Gideon sort of quotes a prophet in a conversation he has. This conversation actually happened in a wine press, which sounds like a really odd place to have a conversation, but that was totally the point of the wine press. You see, Gideon had some food, and he was trying to hide it from the raiders of the Midianites. And so he thought, okay, well, the Midianites, they're going to look everywhere for the food, but they probably won't look in a wine press for food, because what moron would put food in a wine press? And Gideon said, I am that moron. I will put my food in the wine press, and then, nobody will take it because they won't know it's there. And by the way, why don't I hide in here too? It's a big place. And so Gideon is hiding in this wine press. He's got the food. He's collecting. He's doing all this stuff. And as the story goes, an angel of the Lord came and spoke to him. And this angel addresses him by saying, Gideon, you are a mighty hero, and God is with you. Now, Gideon, he didn't exactly know he was talking to an angel, but he knew that what the angel said was upsetting. Gideon was extremely hostile in this conversation to this angel, because he had listened to this prophet and actually was extremely hostile about the preaching of the prophet. I mean, he said to the angel, he said, what are you talking about? God is with us. If God is with us, why am I in a wine press? Look around, dude. Read the room. I am in a wine press, and that's dumb. And you're coming and telling me that God's with me. If God's with me, then why are the Midianites raping everybody? Why are they killing people? Why are they stealing from us? Why are we all hiding? If God's with us, what's happening? Oh, I'm supposed to believe that God's with me because God was with some people like hundreds of years ago? Well, good for them, stranger. Glad God helped them with their Egypt problem. That's of no help to me. Gideon openly, mockingly, angrily argues with what he thinks is just this guy who's, hey, listen, I'm an angel. You should talk to me, I don't know, nicer than that. And it's interesting because, an angel, they're not used to having these conversations with people. Usually people are afraid of angels, or at the very least, I don't know, respectful. Kind of. But Gideon, he's just hurt. And he's quoting the prophet. He's like, we heard this prophet telling us all these things I'm supposed to believe. That's a neat prophet, but you're not talking about us. And if God was really so awesome, I wouldn't be needing to listen to you in the first place. And so the angel goes on to try to say, okay, well, we're just going to set all that aside. You're an angry person. Set all that aside, and he says, okay, actually, so about the Midianite problem, God has decided that you are going to be the leader of Israel who defeats the Midianites. That's God's plan. And when Gideon heard that, I think his hostility turned into just laughter. Because Gideon's thinking, listen, man, clearly you're not an angel or speaking for God, because if you were, you would know that I'm the weakest person in the weakest tribe of Israel. This is essentially like, asking the kid on the end of the bench on a basketball team to shoot the game-winning shot in the championship game. Coaches get fired for that. It doesn't matter if it goes in. Okay, if by some miracle this is a Disney movie and it goes in, like, the dog passed to him in the Disney movie, right? Air Bud passes to the terrible kid on the end of the bench. If that's what this is, coach still gets fired because it was a dumb plan. And Gideon says, listen, there's no way. I'm not a soldier, man. I can't fight. I can't do anything. And also, I don't know if you heard, I'm a little hostile about your plan anyway. I don't like anything you're talking about. I don't want to do anything at all. Leave me alone. Let me hang out of my wine press in peace. And so the angel says, okay, what can I do? What can I do to prove this to you? That this is the plan, and I really want you to do this, and God is with you, and it's going to work out, and man, you're angry. And Gideon says, okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go get some dinner, and I'll bring back a sacrifice. How about that? And if you could do something miraculous with the sacrifice, then I'll believe you. And so he does that. He goes home and he gets some dinner, and he gets this young goat, and he brings it back, and he says, okay. He gets this rock, and he sort of makes this makeshift altar out of it. He says, okay, prove yourself, and I'll listen. And so the angel said, well, that's super easy. And he made the rock catch on fire from the inside somehow, which is really hard. I don't know if you've ever tried to light a rock on fire from the inside, but it doesn't work. And it came out, and it consumed everything. And it was like, yeah, see, you can't do that. And it was then that Gideon realized, oh, man, probably should have been nicer to the angel guy. But even still, he said, it's a crazy plan. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you, Sir Angel, but this is a crazy plan. This is dumb. I don't want to do this. And so Gideon he goes to God at this point. He says, hey, what is happening? What am I supposed to be doing? And God tells him. So now in the story, we're introducing God speaking to him. Let's put a pin on that. So God speaks to Gideon, and he's like, okay, here's what let's start small. Let's not fight wars yet. Let's start small. Your dad, your dad is sort of awful. He has made all these altars to these other gods, which is sort of the problem at the moment. So just go tear those down. And Gideon's like, yeah, I can do that. It's no problem. And he went and he tears everything down, and it really kind of dovetails nicely with the prophet who had talked about repenting and no longer worshiping these other deities. Now some guy comes along and is like, hey, better go ahead and knock these altars out. And it fit really well, and the people repented, and things were good. And Gideon's like, cool, I can do that. Mild demolition, I'm good with. Leading an army, I'm not so good with. Because again, guy at the end of the bench. And so God says, well, okay, but see, we were just starting small. You're actually going to go ahead and lead that army now. And if we're scoring at home, Gideon has heard from a prophet. He has spoken to an angel. He has witnessed a miracle. And he has heard directly from God. One would think at a certain point, Gideon would say okay without arguing or doubting everything. One would think he would not act like a small child who's being told to clean his room 3 days a week and has been for 3 days a week for the entirety of their lives. This is not surprising. Go clean your room. But those of you guys who have ever had a child, no. Go clean your room. It's like your child has never heard that before. What are you talking about? A room? I don't even have one of those. And so Gideon, like the child who doesn't even have a room to be cleaned, God says, I want you to lead these people. And Gideon's like, no, that's not going to work. Not going to do that. I mean, I've heard from a prophet and an angel and God himself, and I've seen a miracle, but that's not enough. I need proof that you really want me to do this. And so Gideon comes up with the dumbest plan ever, and I love how ridiculous this plan is. It's the type of miracle, okay, he could have asked for any miracle. God's going to do it. But he doesn't ask for anything big or dramatic or even remotely helpful. He basically asks God to do a parlor trick. He says, okay, I'm going to lay out this piece of wool on the ground. I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to wake up, and the next morning, here's what I want to happen. I want there to be no morning dew at all anywhere around the wool, but I want it to all be in the wool. Can you do that, God? And the creator of heaven and earth and eternity and reality itself said, well, I'll see if I can figure that out. So he puts the wool out, he goes to bed, he wakes up, and, well, there it is. God, who created human beings in his image, can handle displacing some water onto some wool. And so Gideon says, okay, well, that was impressive. It wasn't impressive. But Gideon thought, that's impressive, but it's not impressive enough. I've heard from a prophet. I've talked to an angel. I've spoken to God himself. I've now seen 2 miracles. I'm going to need to see a third. And God's probably thinking, okay, cool, give me something fun. Give me something fun. Like, I'll make a new planet for you, man. I don't care. Like, I'll stop the sun. Like, I do that kind of stuff. Man, virgin birth is coming, dude. We can do anything. And Gideon's like, all right, here's what I need. I'm going to take this piece of wool. I'm going to put it on the ground. And this time what I want is no dew on the wool, and I want it to be real wet all around it. And I think at that point, God's like, just go to bed. Just go to bed. It'll be fine in the morning. Why did I choose this guy? The next morning, sure enough, God is able to displace water. We've already proven that. And finally, Gideon's like, well, that miracle, not the prophet or the angel or the voice of God of the first 2 miracles, but that miracle, I guess my doubts are gone. And his story ends like really well because Gideon ends up finally doing what God wants, and he goes and God, it's funny, I swear God just messes with him. If you read the story, God just sort of messes with him. Like, oh, your army's too big. Better whittle that army down. And ends up with just 300 guys, and Gideon's like, this is the dumbest plan ever. God's like, it is the dumbest plan. That's what's fun about it. And he ends up defeating the Midianites with 300 guys in this really dumb, convoluted plan that totally works because, God's doing stuff. And it's a very fun, really awesome, amazing story. And at the end, Gideon, he's a champion, essentially. He's a leader of the people. The people see how amazing he is and see how awesome he is and see his connection to God and see his faith and see all that. And they say, Gideon, we want you to be our king. Set up a royal line, a monarchy. And proving how amazing he is, Gideon says, are you kidding? Not only will I not be king, but no one will be king in Israel. We already have a king. He's God. He's the one who saved us. Have you not been listening? God doesn't want his people ruled over by a person. They already have a God. And the people for like 10 pages in the Bible are like, yeah, okay, that sounds great. And the next chapter, they may make a king, and they think they're doing the right thing. But Gideon doesn't do that. Gideon, he knows, he's intelligent enough, he's faithful enough to know what God actually wants from his people. It's no wonder that when we get to the New Testament and they're writing about the amazing heroes of people in the Old Testament, Gideon's on that list. Gideon is this amazing, faithful, incredible person. Saved Israel, refused the throne. And also didn't listen to a prophet, and also argued with an angel, and also listened to God and said, God, I don't like what you're talking about, and also demanded 3 miracles, 2 of which were really, really dumb, before he believed in God. Gideon is incredibly faithful, and also the definition of what it means to doubt. He's not one or the other. He's faithful, and he doubts. And it's not this neat thing either in the story. I mean, like, he tore down the idols, knowing God wanted him to do that, and then when God tells him to do something else, he still argues with God. Like, it's not even a neat thing where, like, well, one day he doubted, and then God got a hold of him, and now he has no doubts. Like, the doubt was sort of all there. It's like they were, his faith and his doubt were holding hands together, and as he went, they went together. And if I'm telling you the truth, I don't know how that works. I don't know why. I don't know how. It's not the way I think it should be. And I asked this question, I don't know, I was probably 13 when I first asked, well, how are we supposed to take any of this seriously if this is how these people are? It's probably the first time I actually read an extremely famous Bible verse. One you've undoubtedly heard. And one that I would say people weaponize it, except it's sort of already a weapon. It's really hard to make this a weapon because it's already a weapon. This is what we read in the letter written by James in the New Testament. James being Jesus' brother, James being an apostle. James says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Man, there's not a lot in that passage that is nuanced. Not a lot of interpretation needed. You do not have to go to Bible college or seminary or take even 10 minutes of study of anything to understand what that passage is saying. Faith is good, doubt is bad. Faith is rewarded, doubt is not. Faith and doubt are opposites. When we ask God for things, we should be doing so in faith, but not doubt, because doubt is the polar opposite of what faith is. And if we doubt, we shouldn't expect anything from God at all. Because we are unstable, because we are a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed. I mean, this guy's writing poetry about how doubt is bad. And I don't know how that passage fits with Gideon, the faithful hero of the Old Testament. Because Gideon, he is a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. He should not expect God to do anything for him, and yet God does. God does do all sorts of things for Gideon. God gives him multiple miracles. God is with him as he conquers the people who are oppressing their people. I mean, there's people, they're stealing and raping and murdering, and God says, okay, and Gideon says, hey, help me to get rid of these people who are hurting, my people. And God says, yeah, great, I'll do that. Gideon doubts. And look, you may think, well, that's just one story, right? Well, it's weird how this becomes a theme in the Bible. Like in the Old Testament, if I wanted to do an Old Testament story, and sometimes as I preach, I'm just like, let's do Old Testament this week. I haven't done it in a while, let's do that. If I just wanted to stick in the Old Testament, I could have talked to you about the doubts of Abraham. I could have talked to you about the doubts of Sarah. I could have talked to you about the doubts of David and Solomon. I could have talked to you about, like half of the Psalms written by people who are doubting God openly. It's a theme. It's everywhere. Faithful people who constantly doubt. If I wanted to go to the New Testament, usually I'm in the New Testament, so if I wanted to stick to the New Testament, I could have talked about Peter, I could have talked about Paul, I could have talked about the Virgin Mary, guys. Story about Mary doubting Jesus in the Bible. Like, they didn't have to put that in there, but they put that in there they wanted us to know, hey, Mary doubted Jesus. There's a guy in the Bible named Doubting Thomas. It's like his superpower. It's like his superhero name. Doubting Thomas. Captain America, Doubting Thomas. Who are the Avengers? We've got Iron Man, we've got Captain America, we've got Hulk, we've got Doubting Thomas, we've got Black Widow. It works. And it's not just the Bible. Like, okay, maybe I'm just totally reading the Bible wrong, start to finish. It's not just the Bible. I can look in church history. Like, I can look at the Reformation. Don't always agree with these guys. I usually don't agree with these guys, but John Calvin and Martin Luther basically create the Christian world we live in. They both wrote extensively about how they doubted constantly. We talk about C.S. Lewis. Everybody loves C.S. Lewis. Aslan the lion, he came up with that stuff. That's great. Tumnus, the weird goat guy. Everybody loves Tumnus. C.S. Lewis wrote extensively about theology, and he wrote extensively about his doubt. I don't have to stay in that part of the church. I can go Catholic. Pope Francis has talked extensively about doubt. And by the way, Pope Francis is the Catholic dude that even people who hate the Catholics are like, well, yeah, he's an okay guy. Mother Teresa. We thought of Mother Teresa a few weeks ago, compared her to John the Baptist. We're getting to John the Baptist, I swear. We compared Mother Teresa to John the Baptist. Mother Teresa talks about how she doesn't even believe in God for a big chunk of her life. She so doubts what's going on. I could talk about progressive people that a lot of people would say, well, they're not even Christians. Rob Bell, Rachel Held Evans, Peter Enns. These amazing, incredible people who bring so much depth to the church, and we really should be reading them. And you're like, they're progressive. I'm more conservative. Cool. Billy Graham, guys. Billy Graham wrote extensively, and you don't get more conservative than Billy Graham. At least in a healthy way. Billy Graham, guys. We can go on and on and on. It's this weird thing. You talk about the scriptures, Old Testament, New Testament. We talk about church history. We talk about church today. People of faith talk about how we also doubt. And I don't know why. Like, I don't. I just don't. I don't know what to do with James 1. Because James 1 seems to say everything we observe is not accurate. Because everything we observe in church history, in the Old Testament, the New Testament, everything we observe is people do not have a doubtless faith. Instead, they have a faith that is riddled with questions, riddled with difficulties. And I don't know how. I don't know why. So if you want to know, well, why is that? Man, you figure it out, and then you let me know. But I can tell you this. The fact is, for myself, man, everybody I just talked about with doubting, they do not hold a candle to the doubt that I have. God, Jesus, the Bible, church, man, there's not a question in earnest I have not asked. There is not a doubt I have not expressed. And so I don't know why this happens, but I do find incredible comfort in my favorite story of John the Baptist. And I think we're just going to go ahead and read it. So let me tell you. It's in the Gospel according to Matthew, and here's what we read. John the Baptist, who was in prison, heard about all the things the Messiah was doing. So he sent his disciples to ask Jesus, "Are you the Messiah we've been expecting? Or should we keep looking for someone else?" Jesus told them, "Go back to John and tell him what you have heard and seen. The blind see, the lame walk, those with leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised to life, and the good news is being preached to the poor." And he added, "God blesses those who do not fall away because of me." As John's disciples were leaving, Jesus began talking about him to the crowds. "What kind of man did you go into the wilderness to see? Was he a weak reed swayed by every breath of wind? Or were you expecting to see a man dressed in expensive clothes? No, people with expensive clothes live in palaces. Were you looking for a prophet? Yes. He is more than a prophet. John is the man to whom the scriptures refer when they say, 'Look, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, and he will prepare your way before you.' And I tell you the truth, of all who have ever lived, none is greater than John the Baptist. Yet even the least person in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he is." We'll get to that last sentence later. The timing of this story is important. John is asking Jesus, "Are you actually the Messiah? Are you really the person we're waiting for?" Which is another way of saying, "Jesus, are you actually the guy I've been preaching about?" John's arrested. He's going to get killed. This is his last living thing we see in the Bible of him. The next story of John the Baptist is he gets killed. So all the other stuff comes before this, which means John was already telling people. Remember, we did this a couple weeks ago. John was already telling people that Jesus was the Messiah. And then one day says, "Hey, Jesus, are you actually the Messiah?" John is doubting what he's preached. And it's not just what he's preached, it's what he's observed. When he baptized Jesus, he saw a miracle. He saw the Holy Spirit descend like a dove and a voice from heaven speak about Jesus, that "This is my beloved Son." John saw that miracle. He was part of that miracle. Are you really the Messiah? John had disciples he sent to Jesus. Guys that he had invested his heart and his time and his soul into. And he says, "Go hang out with Jesus, follow Jesus, not me." He was that confident. And then one day he said, Are you sure you're that guy? Did I make a mistake?" John doubts after John shows all of his faith. It's not a neat thing where one day, you have faith and then it goes away, or then the doubts go away. John's doubt is with him. They're holding hands. I love Jesus' answer. I love how Jesus responds. Jesus doesn't say, "Yeah, moron." But he also doesn't say, "Yeah." Jesus says, "Just tell him what I'm doing. He'll figure it out on his own." There's so much beauty in a God who trusts us enough to think. There is so much beauty in a God who expects us to participate in our own faith and wants us to wrestle and question and maybe even doubt so that way we grow. God doesn't want just to spoon feed the answer to John. He says, "Here are the tools. You tell me. Who am I?" But then Jesus turns to the crowds. And he talks about how amazing John is. This, not the baptism, not the sermon, not standing up to Herod, not defending the weak and the poor, and we talked about that last week, not any of that. It's when he expresses doubt that Jesus says, "You know what? That John guy's amazing." Which means that the doubt of John did nothing to change the opinion of Jesus. It didn't do anything. John's doubts were irrelevant to Jesus' opinions of John. And so I don't know why. I really don't. I don't know why. When we question and doubt and wrestle, I don't know why we can't do that James thing and say, yeah, I believe and have no questions. I don't know why. And by the way, some of you guys may be able to. Awesome. Wonderful. Hold on to that with both hands. Hold on. Because that's got to be amazing, right? It's got to be incredible to have faith and not question. But for the Gideons and the John the Baptists and the Mother Teresas and for me, there's a truth that we find in John that is so comforting and helps us get from point A to point B, even on the most difficult days of our doubts. The fourth lesson from our series, the last lesson from our series of John the Baptist called Camel Hair and Locusts is this. Your doubt doesn't diminish your faith or your worth in any way. Your doubt does not diminish your faith or your worth in any way. I don't know how it works. I don't know why it can't just be a puzzle. I don't. But I know that we're called to be like John. And I mean that sincerely. Remember, Jesus said that last sentence, that in the kingdom of heaven, that everyone is greater than John in the kingdom of heaven. I mean, this idea is that we are like John, that we participate in this world, that I don't know how God ranks stuff. I don't know if God ranks stuff. There's all sorts of questions about that, but God is putting us on a level playing field with John the Baptist. You and me and everyone we know, we are put in a level playing field where we are people who experience and know God in a way that John didn't, and that we are called to be people like John. And what that means is people who are honest. I think what I love about John, maybe more than anything else, is his honesty. He says, I don't believe in organized religion, so he leaves. He says, I don't want to be with civilization, so he hangs out with animals in the wilderness. He says, I see that the king is hurting people, so he goes and tells the king, you're hurting people, stop it. John is honest. And when he says, Jesus, I don't know if I still believe in you. Are you really the guy? He says so. I'll be very honest. I could do a lot of what John the Baptist did. I would not have asked Jesus, are you serious? Like, I would have asked my buddies, do you think he's serious? I would not have directly gone to Jesus and said, hey, man, after all this time, I just want to know, like, are you just lying to everybody right now? That's honest. You see, God knows all this stuff anyway. God knows your faith. God knows your questions. God knows your doubts. What God wants of you is to trust his love. Sometimes I don't think we trust that God loves us enough. We don't feel like we can be honest with God. We don't feel like we can be ourselves with God because we don't trust that he'll still love us when we do. But John the Baptist shows us an authentic honesty. And Jesus responds with love and grace. Turns out the God who made us can handle who we actually are. He knows anyway. God can handle that. And so we are called to be people of faithfulness. And you know what? That doesn't mean we're called to be people of doubt, but what it does mean is that when we doubt, when we are like the people of the scriptures, when we are like people of history, when we are just who we are, our faith is not diminished and our worth is not diminished because God can handle it. To be a Christian means to trust in so many things and in so many ways. And perhaps hardest of all is to trust that God will love us when we are honest with him. And I don't think there is any greater lesson from Camel Hair and Locusts and John the Baptist than that very lesson.